In the spring of 1987, every irrigation dealer in Pottawatomie County, Iowa, sold the same pump. This was not a decision. It was gravity. It was the way the Missouri River ran south, the way the corn came up in June, the way the sky turned the color of old iron before a storm. Grundfos centrifugal pumps, 4-inch submersible units, stainless steel impellers, 2-year warranty, serviced out of a dealership on Highway 92 called Heartland Ag Supply. That was what you bought. That was what your father bought. That was what your grandfather would have bought if centrifugal submersibles had existed when he was sinking wells in the 1940s. Not because anyone chose it, but because nobody could imagine anything else. Let me tell you about Dale Musselman, because you need to understand the man before you can understand what he did with 15 years and a shed full of other people's problems. Dale was 61 years old in 1987 and had farmed the same 640 acres outside of Carson, Iowa, for 34 years. His father, Harold, had bought the land in 1948 with money saved from 2 tours in the Pacific and a decade of renting ground in Shelby County. Harold had sunk the first well himself in 1951, a hand-dug affair that went down 18 feet into the alluvial sand and gave the farmhouse running water for the first time. Dale had watched him do it. He was 7 years old, and he stood at the edge of the hole in the August heat and handed his father tools when he asked for them, and that was how Dale Musselman learned that water underground was not a given. It was something you went and got, something you understood, something you maintained. By 1987, Dale had 4 irrigation wells on his property. He ran 4-inch submersible pumps in all of them, but his were not Grundfos units. His were Gould's turbine pumps, the older design, the kind with bronze impellers and cast-iron bowls that Gould's had been manufacturing in Seneca Falls, New York, since 1948. He had bought his first one in 1962 for $340, and it was still running. He had bought 3 more over the following decade, all Gould's, all the same basic design, and he maintained them himself. He had the service manuals, he had the bearing pullers and the impeller wrenches and the shaft alignment tools. He had a bench in his shop with a vise mounted to it that had been his father's, and on the shelf above the bench were 4 3-ring binders, one for each pump, with every service record, every parts replacement, every measurement he had ever taken going back to 1962. Dale Musselman did not believe in throwing things away. He believed in understanding them. The man who ran Heartland Ag Supply was named Ronnie Fitch, and Ronnie Fitch was everything Dale was not in the way that the dealership world tends to produce. He was 44 years old in 1987, broad-shouldered, loud in a room, the kind of man who wore a company jacket with his name embroidered above the breast pocket and considered that a form of identity. He had built Heartland from a 2-bay shop into a 12-employee operation over 15 years. He carried the Grundfos line exclusively, had a service contract with 3 county drainage districts, and had sold somewhere north of 400 submersible pump units in Pottawatomie and surrounding counties since 1978. When Ronnie Fitch told a farmer what pump to buy, the farmer bought it. That was the arrangement. That was the gravity. Now let me tell you about what Ronnie Fitch did with pumps that failed. The Grundfos units Heartland sold were good pumps. They were not bad pumps, but they were designed for clean, cold, consistent water tables, and the alluvial aquifer under Pottawatomie County was none of those things. The water ran warm in summer, carried fine sand, and the water table fluctuated by as much as 12 feet between a wet spring and a dry August. Centrifugal submersibles do not love sand. The impellers wear, the seals fail, and when a Grundfos unit failed under warranty, Ronnie Fitch's protocol was to pull it, ship it back to the distributor, collect the warranty replacement, and install the new unit. The failed unit came back from the distributor marked as non-rebuildable, which in distributor language meant we don't want to pay to fix it, which Ronnie Fitch translated into his own language as scrap. Except Ronnie Fitch did not scrap them, he stacked them. He had a lean-to shed behind his shop, a corrugated steel affair with a dirt floor and a sliding door that never quite slid all the way, and that is where the failed pumps went. By 1990, there were 11 of them. By 1993, there were 27. By 1999, there were somewhere between 40 and 60, depending on whether you counted the partial units and the loose impeller stacks and the motors that had been pulled from their pump bowls and stacked separately. Ronnie Fitch was not saving them for any reason he could have articulated. He just had not gotten around to throwing them away. That is a different thing from keeping them, but the result is the same. Let me tell you about what Dale Musselman noticed, because he had been noticing things quietly for a long time. Dale had watched the Grundfos failures accumulate in the county the way a man watches a field drain after a heavy rain. Not with alarm, just with attention. He knew why they were failing. He had talked to the county extension agent about the sand content in the aquifer. He had read the Grundfos service documentation that Ronnie Fitch's parts counter had given him once when he asked for it, and he had noted that the impeller clearance tolerances on the centrifugal design were specified for water with a sand content of less than 50 parts per million. He had tested his own well water at the ISU Extension Lab in 1984, and the result had come back at 230 parts per million on a dry August afternoon. He had written that number in the front cover of his pump service binder with a red pen and drawn a small circle around it. He had not told Ronnie Fitch about it. Ronnie Fitch had not asked. What Dale understood, and what Ronnie Fitch did not, was that the Gould's turbine design handled sand differently. The turbine bowl assembly used a different impeller geometry, semi-open impellers with wider passages, and the shaft bearings were lubricated by the pumped water itself, which meant they were designed with the assumption that the water would carry some particulate. The Gould's turbine did not fight the sand. It accommodated it. It was not a better pump in every situation. It was a better pump for this situation, for this aquifer, for this county. Dale had known this since approximately 1965 when he had pulled his first Gould's unit for its 5-year service and found the impellers worn by a measurable amount, but still within specification, which told him the design had anticipated exactly this kind of wear and built the tolerance to accommodate it. In the summer of 1992, Dale drove to Heartland Ag Supply on a Tuesday morning to buy a box of shaft seal kits for his own pumps. He ordered them at the parts counter, and while he was waiting for the counterman to pull the order, he walked around the side of the building and looked at the lean-to shed. The door was open a few feet, and he could see the stacked pumps inside. He stood there for a moment. Then he went back to the parts counter, collected his seal kits, and drove home. That evening, he called Ronnie Fitch. He told Ronnie he had seen the pumps in the shed. He told Ronnie he thought he could use them. Not all of them, he said, but some of them. He explained that the Grundfos centrifugal units used a motor frame that was compatible with a turbine bowl assembly if you had the right adapter coupling. and that he had been thinking for some time that a hybrid rebuild, turbine bowl on a centrifugal motor, might produce a unit that would outperform either design in their specific aquifer conditions. He told Ronnie he would take the pumps off his hands, clean up the shed, and if the experiment worked, he would let Ronnie know what he found. The silence on the other end of the line lasted about 4 seconds. Then Ronnie Fitch started laughing. It was not a mean laugh. That is worth saying. Ronnie Fitch was not a cruel man. It was the laugh of a man who has spent 15 years in a business and believes that the business has taught him everything the subject has to teach, and who encounters someone proposing something that falls outside the boundaries of what the business has taught him, and whose first response is to locate the proposal within the category of things that do not need to be taken seriously. It was a laugh that said, "I have sold 400 of these pumps, and I have the service contracts for 3 drainage districts, and I have a 12-employee shop, and I think I know a little bit about irrigation pumps, Dale." It was a laugh that was really about Ronnie Fitch, not about Dale Musselman. But Dale Musselman was the one who had to hear it. Ronnie told him the pumps were scrap. He told him the motors on the failed units were burned or corroded or both. He told him that a hybrid rebuild was not something any manufacturer would support or warranty. He told him that if Dale wanted to spend his time in his shop playing with broken pumps, that was his business. But Ronnie would not be held responsible for what happened when Dale put a cobbled-together unit down a well and it failed. He said the word "cobbled together" with a specific emphasis that communicated his opinion of the entire proposal. Dale said he understood. He asked if he could have the pumps. Ronnie said, "Sure, come get them. It'll clean out my shed." Let me tell you about the 15 years that followed, because they are the reason this story is still being told in Pottawatomie County. Dale borrowed his neighbor's flatbed trailer and made 3 trips to Heartland over the following 2 weeks, hauling pumps. He had 41 units by the time he was done, plus 17 loose motor assemblies and a collection of impeller stacks and shaft components that filled 4 5-gallon buckets. He stacked them in his own shed, the big one behind the machine shop, on wooden pallets to keep them off the dirt floor. He tagged each unit with a piece of orange flagging tape and a number written in black marker. He started a new 3-ring binder. What he found when he began disassembly was more or less what he had expected. 23 of the 41 pump units had motors that were genuinely beyond economical rebuild. The windings were burned, the housings were cracked from freeze damage, the shaft seals had failed so completely that the motor cavities had filled with sand and water, and the rotors had corroded to the point where the clearances were gone. He set those aside. He was not sentimental about them. 18 units had motors that were serviceable or rebuildable. The motor frames were intact. The windings showed continuity on his meter. The shaft seals had failed, but the damage was limited to the seal itself and the bearing surfaces. Those 18 motors went onto the bench. The bowl assemblies were a different story. Every single one of the 41 pump bowls was repairable. The centrifugal impellers were worn, some of them beyond spec, but the bowl housings, the discharge heads, the column pipe, all of it was salvageable. He cleaned them, measured them, recorded every dimension in the binder. Then he started making phone calls. He called the Gould's distributor in Omaha, a man named Pete Schreiber who had been selling him parts for 30 years. He explained what he was trying to do. Pete listened without laughing. Pete said he thought the adapter coupling idea was mechanically sound, but that Gould's would not provide any documentation for it because it was not a configuration they manufactured. He said he could sell Dale the turbine bowl assemblies as replacement parts, and what Dale did with them after that was between Dale and his conscience. Dale said that was fine. He ordered 18 turbine bowl assemblies, 4-inch, the same stage configuration as the original Grundfos units, and a box of adapter couplings machined to connect the Gould's bowl shaft to the Grundfos motor shaft. The adapter couplings did not exist as a catalog item. Dale had drawn them up himself on graph paper, dimensioned to the thousandth of an inch, and he had taken the drawing to a machine shop in Council Bluffs, run by a man named Gary Hendricks, who had been doing precision work for farmers and small manufacturers for 20 years. Gary looked at the drawing for about 90 seconds and said he could have them in 2 weeks. Dale said he would need 18 to start. Let me tell you about the science of what Dale was building, because you need to understand why it worked before you can understand what happened when it did. A centrifugal pump and a turbine pump both move water, but they do it differently in ways that matter enormously in a sandy aquifer. A centrifugal impeller is a closed or semi-closed disc that spins and throws water outward by centrifugal force. It is efficient, it is fast, and it is sensitive to anything that increases friction or wear on the tight clearances between the impeller and the bowl. Sand is friction. Sand is wear. A turbine bowl assembly uses a different geometry. The impeller is more open, the passages are wider, the wear surfaces are designed with the expectation that the pumped fluid will carry particulate. The Gould's turbine bowl that Dale was installing was rated for water with up to 400 parts per million of sand content. His aquifer ran at 230. He was building a pump that was designed for exactly the water it would pump. The motor he was keeping was the Grundfos motor, which was a good motor. Well-sealed, efficient, reliable when the bowl assembly was not destroying it with sand-induced shaft loads. By removing the centrifugal bowl that was killing the motor and replacing it with a turbine bowl that would not, Dale was not cobbling something together. He was correcting a design mismatch. He was building what the pump should have been in the first place for this specific application. He rebuilt the first unit in February of 1993. He ran it on a test stand in his shop, a 50-gallon stock tank with a recirculating loop and a bucket of Missouri River sand added to the water to simulate aquifer conditions. He ran it for 72 hours. He pulled it, disassembled it, measured every wear surface, and recorded the numbers. The impeller clearances were within 0.02 of an inch of where they had been at the start of the test. He ran it for another 72 hours. Same result. He called Pete Schreiber in Omaha and read him the numbers. Pete said that was better than a new centrifugal unit would do in those conditions. Dale said he knew. He spent the next 3 years rebuilding the remaining 17 units. He was not in a hurry. He had his own farm to run. He rebuilt pumps in the winter when the fields were frozen and the days were short and there was time for bench work. By 1996, he had 18 complete hybrid units standing on wooden pallets in his shed, tagged and documented. Everyone tested on his stand, everyone with a service record in the binder. He had spent approximately $14,000 on parts, machining, and materials. The 18 Grundfos units, purchased new, would have cost approximately $63,000. He did not tell Ronnie Fitch. Let me tell you about what was happening at Heartland Ag Supply during those same years, because the story has 2 tracks, and they were running toward each other the whole time. Ronnie Fitch had continued selling Grundfos units through the 1990s. The failures had continued at the same rate, roughly 1 in 8 units per year in the county's sandy aquifer conditions, which was within the range that Grundfos considered acceptable for the product line and which Ronnie Fitch had learned to manage as a revenue stream rather than a problem. Failed unit pulled, warranty, replacement installed, service call billed, customer retained. It was a system. It worked for Ronnie. It did not work especially well for the farmers who were paying service call fees of $340 to $480 per pull depending on well depth. But the farmers did not know there was an alternative and Ronnie Fitch was not going to tell them. By 2001, the Grundfos distributor that Heartland used had been acquired by a larger regional distributor that renegotiated the warranty terms. The new terms reduced the warranty replacement window from 2 years to 18 months and added a clause requiring documented water quality testing before warranty claims would be honored. Ronnie Fitch had never done water quality testing. He had never told his customers they needed it. When the first warranty claim under the new terms was denied because there was no water quality documentation on file, Ronnie Fitch called the distributor and argued for 45 minutes and lost. He ate the cost of that replacement unit himself. He ate the next 3 as well before he changed his sales contracts to require water quality testing at installation, which added $180 to every new pump sale and which his customers did not appreciate. His margins were compressing. His service volume was up, but his warranty recovery was down. He had 2 employees quit in 2002 and did not replace them. The 12-employee shop had become an 8-employee shop. He was still the biggest irrigation dealer in the county. He was still the man whose name was on the jacket. But the jacket fit differently than it had in 1987. In the fall of 2002, Dale Musselman's neighbor, a farmer named Ken Albrecht who ran 480 acres 2 miles north of Dale's place, had a pump fail. It was a Grundfos unit, 4 years old, pulled by Heartland for the 3rd time in 4 years. Ronnie Fitch's service technician told Ken the motor was burned and the bowl assembly was worn beyond spec and the unit needed to be replaced. The quote for a new unit installed was $2,100. Ken Albrecht called Dale Musselman that evening and asked if Dale still had those pumps in his shed. Dale said he did. Ken came over the next morning. Dale showed him the rebuilt unit that matched Ken's well specification. Same depth, same flow rate requirement, same discharge configuration. He showed Ken the test records. He showed Ken the wear measurements from the 72-hour sand tests. He told Ken the unit would cost him $800 installed, and that Dale would install it himself because he had the tools and the knowledge, and it was not a complicated job if you knew what you were doing. He told Ken that if the unit failed within 2 years, he would replace it at no charge from his remaining inventory. Ken said yes. Dale installed the pump on a Wednesday in October. It ran. It ran well. The flow rate was within 5% of the original specification. The amp draw was nominal. The discharge pressure was steady. Dale recorded all of it in the binder. He added a page for Ken Albrecht's well with the date and the installation measurements. Word travels in a small county the way water travels in a flat field. Slowly at first, then all at once. By the spring of 2003, Dale had installed 7 of his rebuilt units for neighboring farmers. By the fall of 2003, he had installed 11. Every one of them was running. He had not had a single callback. Let me tell you about what Ronnie Fitch heard, because he heard it the way that men who hold court at the co-op always hear things. From 3 different people on the same Tuesday morning, each one thinking he was the first to tell him. Ronnie drove out to Dale's farm on a Thursday afternoon in November of 2003. He did not call first. He pulled his truck into the yard, and Dale was coming out of the machine shop with grease on his hands and a shaft seal in one of them, and Ronnie stood by his truck with his hands in his jacket pockets and said he had heard Dale was selling pumps. Dale said he was not selling them. He was installing them for his neighbors at cost. Ronnie said that was the same thing. Dale said it was not the same thing, and Ronnie knew it. There was a silence. Ronnie looked at the shed where the remaining units were stored. He asked if he could see them. Dale opened the shed door and let him in. The units were on their pallets, tagged and numbered, the binders on the shelf above them. Ronnie walked down the row slowly. He picked up one of the service binders and opened it and looked at the test records. He set it back down. He looked at one of the adapter couplings where it was visible on the nearest unit. He did not say anything for a long time. Then he said, "I told you those were scrap." Dale said, "You did." Ronnie said, "How many have you put in?" Dale said, 11. 0 failures. Another silence. Ronnie closed the shed door on his way out. He got in his truck. He sat there for a moment with the engine running, and then he rolled down the window and said, "I need you to understand that what you're doing creates liability exposure for both of us." Dale said he had talked to his insurance agent and his attorney, and he was comfortable with his position. Ronnie rolled the window up and drove away. Now, let me pause here and ask you something. Have you ever watched a man leave a place where he just learned something that cost him 15 years of wrong decisions and tried to imagine what that drive home felt like? Because Ronnie Fitch drove 12 miles back to Heartland Egg Supply that afternoon, knowing that the pumps he had stacked in his shed as scrap had been rebuilt into working units by a farmer with a bench vise and a graph paper drawing and a phone call to a machine shop in Council Bluffs. He drove home, knowing that 11 of his former customers were now running those units. He drove home, knowing that Dale Musselman had been right in 1992 when he called on the phone and Ronnie had laughed at him. That is a specific kind of knowledge. It does not improve with distance. Let me tell you about the years that followed, because the story does not end in that shed. Heartland Ag Supply closed in the spring of 2007. It was not a sudden collapse. It was the slow kind, the kind where the employees leave one by one and the service contracts lapse and the inventory sits and the bank conversations get longer and less productive. Ronnie Fitch had been fighting the margin compression for 5 years. The warranty terms had never recovered to what they had been before 2001. He had lost 3 major service contracts to a competitor out of Council Bluffs who was selling a different pump line with better sand tolerance ratings. By the end of 2006, Heartland was a 4-employee operation running out of a building that had been sized for 12. In February of 2007, Ronnie Fitch called his remaining employees into the shop on a Monday morning and told them he was closing at the end of the month. He paid them through the end of March. He sold the building and the remaining inventory to the Council Bluffs competitor and retired to a house in Avoca where he grew a large garden and did not talk about irrigation pumps. Dale Musselman heard about the closure from Ken Albrecht, who had heard about it at the co-op. Dale was 81 years old by then and had farmed his ground for 54 years. He had installed 22 of his rebuilt units for neighbors over the preceding 4 years. He had 7 units remaining in the shed. He had not had a single failure in any of the 22 installations. His son, Gary Musselman, had been farming alongside him since 1998. Gary was 49 years old and had his father's habit of watching things quietly and his father's habit of writing things down. He had helped with the pump rebuilds from the beginning. He knew every unit in the shed, knew the test records, knew the installation history. When Dale's health began to decline in 2009 and the farming operation passed incrementally to Gary, the shed and everything in it passed with it. Let me tell you about what Gary Musselman did with what his father left him, because this is the part of the story that explains why I am telling it to you now. Gary did not treat the remaining units as inventory to be used up and discarded. He treated them the way his father had treated everything mechanical, as objects that deserved to be understood and maintained and passed on in better condition than you received them. He pulled each of the 7 remaining units from storage, disassembled them, inspected every component, replaced anything that had degraded during storage, and put them back on the pallets with updated service records. He added a section to each binder documenting the storage inspection. He was meticulous in the way that men become meticulous when they have watched their fathers be meticulous, and understood that the meticulousness was not perfectionism, but respect. In 2011, a farmer named Darrell Opp, who ran 320 acres east of Carson, had a pump fail. He was 67 years old and had bought his irrigation system from Heartland in 1999 and had been getting his service work done by the Council Bluffs competitor since Heartland closed. The competitor quoted him $2,400 for a new unit installed. Darrell Opp drove to Gary Musselman's farm and asked about the pumps he had heard about from Ken Albrecht. Gary showed him the shed. He showed him the binders. He showed him his father's original test records from 1993 and the installation records from 2003 through 2007. He showed him the adapter coupling drawing on graph paper in Dale's handwriting. He told Darrell the unit would cost $800 installed, same as his father had charged, same terms. Darrell Opp looked at the graph paper drawing for a long time. He said, "Your father drew this himself?" Gary said he did. Darrell said, "How old was he when he drew it?" Gary said, 67, same age you are now. Darrell said he would take the pump. Gary installed it on a Thursday in April of 2011. He recorded the installation in the binder. The pump ran without incident. It is still running. Let me tell you one last thing about Dale Musselman, because he deserves it. Dale died in March of 2013 at the age of 87. He had farmed his 640 acres for 56 years. He had sunk 4 wells and maintained them himself for the entirety of that time, and not one of his own pumps had ever failed in service. Not the Gould's turbine units he had bought in the 1960s, not the hybrid rebuilds he had installed in the 1990s to replace aging originals. The last service record in his personal pump binder was dated October of 2012, 5 months before he died. He had pulled his number 3 well pump for its scheduled 5-year service, measured the impeller clearances, replaced the shaft seal, recorded the bearing clearances, and reinstalled it. The measurements were within 0.02 of an inch of the measurements he had recorded at the previous service in 2007. He noted this in the binder in his careful handwriting and added a small notation at the bottom of the page. Design holding up well. His funeral was at the First Lutheran Church in Carson. There were 200 people there, which in Pottawatomie County is a large number. Ken Albrecht was there. Darrell Opp was there. The 11 other farmers who had Dale's rebuilt pumps running in their wells were there. Gary Musselman sat in the front pew with his wife and his 2 children, a daughter named Leah, who was 22 and studying agricultural engineering at Iowa State, and a son named Marcus, who was 19 and had been helping his father on the farm since he was old enough to hold a wrench. Ronnie Fitch was there too. He sat in the back. He did not speak to Gary after the service. He stood at the back of the room during the reception and held a cup of coffee and looked at the photographs of Dale that Gary had arranged on a table near the door. Dale on his tractor in 1971. Dale with his father Harold in front of the farmhouse in 1960. Dale standing in front of the open shed with a pump unit in his hands and the binders visible on the shelf behind him, taken sometime in the mid-1990s. Ronnie looked at that last photograph for a long time. Then he set down his coffee cup and left. Gary saw him go. He did not say anything. Let me tell you about the spring of 2019, because that is when the story completed its circle. Leah Musselman had graduated from Iowa State in 2014 with a degree in agricultural engineering and had come home to farm alongside her father. She had her grandfather's notebooks and her grandfather's habits. She had also spent 4 years studying soil mechanics, hydraulic systems, and precision agriculture, and she had come back with ideas that made Gary's eyebrows go up the first time she laid them out on the kitchen table. She wanted to convert the remaining 5 of her grandfather's rebuilt units to variable frequency drive control. VFD controllers, she explained, would allow the pumps to modulate their output in real time based on soil moisture sensor data rather than running at fixed speed and fixed flow rate. The energy savings would be somewhere between 30 and 40%, based on field trials she had read from a Kansas State study published in 2017. The installation cost per unit would be approximately $1,200 in controller hardware. The payback period at current energy prices was approximately 2.8 years per well. Gary listened to all of this. He looked at the Kansas State study she had printed out and set in front of him. He looked at the numbers she had written on a yellow legal pad, the same kind of legal pad his father had used. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Your grandfather would have done the same thing." Leah said she knew. Gary said, "Do all 5. Let me tell you about what those 5 pumps are doing right now, because this is not a story that ended when Dale Musselman died, or when Heartland Ag Supply closed, or when the last of the original Grundfos units was pulled from service somewhere in Pottawatomie County and sent to an actual scrap yard. The 5 hybrid units that Leah converted to VFD control are running on the Musselman farm today. They are run-in pumps that Dale rebuilt between 1993 and 1996 using motors that Ronnie Fitch considered scrap, bowl assemblies designed in Seneca Falls, New York, and adapter couplings drawn on graph paper by a 67-year-old farmer who had been paying attention since 1951. The VFD controllers are talking to soil moisture sensors that Leah installed in 2019, and the system is delivering water at precisely the rate the crop needs it, not the rate the pump was designed to run. The energy bills are down 34% from the pre-conversion baseline. The service records are in the binders on the shelf in the shed, updated in Gary's handwriting and, increasingly, in Leah's. The binders are the same 3-ring binders Dale started in 1962. He bought them at the Pamita store in Harlan. They are brown with a red stripe on the spine, and they are held together with electrical tape where the hinges have cracked from age. Gary has been asked more than once why he does not just scan the records and put them in a computer. He says he will get around to it. He has been saying that for 10 years. Leah has started keeping parallel digital records without asking permission, which is exactly the kind of thing her grandfather would have done. There is a photograph on the wall of the machine shop. It was taken in 1995 by Dale's wife, Eleanor, who died in 2004. It shows Dale standing in the shed in front of the first pallet of rebuilt units, holding one of the adapter couplings up to the light from the open door, examining it. He is wearing a canvas work jacket and a seed cap, and his hands are black with grease. He is not looking at the camera. He is looking at the coupling. His expression is the expression of a man who has just confirmed that something is exactly the way he thought it would be. Gary walks past that photograph every morning when he goes into the shop. He has never taken it down. He has never moved it. It is in the same place Eleanor hung it in 1995, and it will be in that place for as long as Gary Musselman is walking into that shop in the morning, which he intends to be for a very long time. Ronnie Fitch is 80 years old now. He still lives in Avoca. His garden is reportedly very good. He has not been back to the Musselman farm since the afternoon in November of 2003, when he stood in the shed and read the test records and said, "I told you those were scrap." Gary does not hold it against him. Dale never did either, as far as Gary knows. The pumps do not require Ronnie Fitch to have been right. They only required Dale Musselman to have been paying attention. 41 pumps went into that shed as other people's problems. 22 of them came out as solutions. 11 of those 22 are still running in wells across Pottawatomie County, some of them on their third decade of service. The motors that Ronnie Fitch's distributor marked non-rebuildable are still pulling water from an aquifer that was always going to carry sand, that was always going to run warm in August, that was always going to fluctuate 12 feet between a wet spring and a dry summer. Dale Musselman knew that in 1984 when he circled the number on the extension lab report. He knew it in 1992 when he stood at the shed door and looked at the stacked pumps. He knew it when Ronnie Fitch laughed at him on the phone and he said quietly, "I understand." He knew it the way that men know things when they have been watching carefully for a very long time and writing down what they see. Some things don't become scrap just because someone decides they're not worth fixing. Sometimes they just wait in a shed for 15 years until the right man comes along with a bearing puller and a graph paper drawn and enough patience to find out what they were always capable of.